Which Generation X abilities have fallen out of favor in the 21st century? Let's go through 20 life skills that we used decades ago but have lost their utility in modern times. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Nowadays, it is pretty common for people to have like 10 different forms of online financing. It is literally possible to transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars with the press of a single button, and in fact, most meaningful transactions are done that way. You might feel old if by now you still find yourself balancing checkbooks and carrying them around, since all the kids these days are onto Venmo and Cash App. Did you know it used to be the opposite? Nowadays, checks really make up only about 4% of all transactions in America. In the 1940s, there were about 2 billion checks in circulation, and that number quadrupled by 1980 when Gen X was thriving. Let that really sink in for a moment so that the creeping march of time really sets in, because from 8 billion to just a couple 100,000 per year is certainly a steep decline. Maintaining a proper checkbook is uncommon nowadays, and people either deal in cash up front or keep it strictly online. Maybe that is not too bad though, since it was kind of annoying keeping up with a checkbook all the time. Another thing you might remember from Jurassic Park movies or reruns of Scooby-Dooby-Doo is that people once relied on paper maps when traveling. They would carry a layout of the terrain or area to just have a sort of mental figure of where they were at a time. It was not so easy to determine your precise location down to the street or building you are in back in the 60s to 80s. Sure, nowadays you have GPS facilities in basically everything, even the cars you drive. But if you wanted to get around properly back in the old days, you had to have a proper map with you. That kind of had its benefits, honestly. It brought out the inquisitive explorer in people and made them interact with where they were more. Sometimes following a paper map would get you lost, but you would find yourself having a better day than wherever you originally planned on going. It is quite easy to get very precise directions now with online maps, so that kind of carefree adventuring is pretty outdated today. Of course, this does not mean stores do not sell physical maps to people, so if you are looking to go on a trip this vacation, buying one might be a good idea for old time's sake, and for times when your internet data runs out. Speaking of libraries, they used to have these catalogs that would fill up several cabinets that people would frequently use to help their browsing go smoother and easier. A catalog had every material that was present in the library, usually in some kind of organized index, down to the author and title as well as the subject. Some of these were alphabetically arranged for further ease, but basically it was a very convenient feature of old libraries in case you ever needed to pick up a book in a hurry. Or if you just did not feel like spending a lot of time searching and wanted to invest more of it reading, it can get pretty boring looking through an entire library. Physical library catalogs became pretty redundant with online databases replacing them that people can easily view and access way faster than the past equivalent. It really is a wonder how humans keep innovating technology to make life easier, but one does miss the nostalgia of a day well spent getting very intimate with your favorite library. Here is an additional fun fact for you. Back in the 70s, revolutionaries would often meet in libraries to hide after protests. During this time, they would surf the catalogs to find old news clippings or books that supported their cause. People sure love to make an aesthetic out of developing photos out of film and vintage cameras and photography, but it was really something that Gen X cherished and grew up with throughout their childhoods. Everyone had a Polaroid camera and plenty of film before a family road trip, or that one plan the whole friend group had been cooking up for months, just waiting for the weekend when everyone's shifts aligned. Whether it was the grainy and dainty quality of those old photos or the process of developing a picture that really immersed people in the hobby, photography done in that era was its own wonderland of fun. It also taught a lot of people how to click much better pictures, since cameras back then did not have half the versatility or beginner friendliness of the ones today. Nowadays, only people with a taste for those kinds of vintage visuals go out of their way to get film tape for pictures, and most cameras that even use tape are hard to find. A romanticized hobby for the kids of today, and a precious childhood memory for the ones of yesterday. It was extremely common for people to carry around thick encyclopedias back in the day too. From nerdy kids who had an early inclination towards science and nature, carrying basic ones with every dinosaur name under the sun, to big fat troves of astrology knowledge. People had an encyclopedia for just about anything, and it also made sense to have one too, and you might be wondering why. Well, today we have Wikipedias and other online resources that mimic the same format for anything we can think of, with even multiple shows having their own fan-made wikis so that you can keep track of all the lore. In the older Generation X, it was not so easy to constantly access information, and so conveniently too, you actually had to get up and go dig in the library for whatever the subject you were tackling was. Sounds pretty painful when you think about handling your university assignments that way. But back then, answering a question was something you could make a whole day out of. Feeling extra curious about something? Just head on over to the local library and browse through the encyclopedias they have. You'll either come out with an answer or 10 different things you never knew before. There is not really a solid point to memorizing phone numbers now either, since smartphones can save any amount of numbers you have and even rid you of duplicate ones to free up space. Nifty little things that we definitely take for granted now, because just about 40 to 50 years ago, if you found a pretty girl at a party and got her number, you had to memorize the whole thing if you wanted any real hope of taking things forward. Looking for a part-time job to make some money on the side after your university classes? Need some dire plumbing work in the residence? Want to reach literally anyone at all with your phone or engage in some kind of human communication? Get a pen and paper if your memory is bad, because besides remembering numbers, there was no way to save contacts as the iPhones and Xiaomis of today. So elegantly put it. People stopped doing that with the start of the early 2000s, and the 2010s were when phones developed to the point that this annoying habit we had to pick up finally was useless enough that we could put it quietly to rest. No more remembering numbers or frantically scouring through your drawers for that sheet with all of the contacts on it. Something that went hand in hand with a landline, telephone, or any communication related to phones that fell off pretty hard were phone books. People would have these thick logs with every contact they needed for any kind of situation. But now online directories basically give you any number that you can think of with added benefits. You can specifically search for a certain number, for example, making the entire process much quicker than going over the phone book again and again, not realizing you skipped the one you were looking for twice already. Phone books have not vanished completely from America, since places like Philadelphia still get around 100,000 phone books made and delivered each year. However, that number is a far cry from how mainstream they really used to be, which was a testament to how much people relied on them. Let's be honest, nobody liked going through the book, but it definitely was a convenient thing to have. Literary arts were definitely a more appreciated aspect of culture for Gen X. People used to take their handwriting incredibly seriously, especially since pen pals and writing letters, customizing handcards yourself, and preparing invitations were all things people did around the year. Especially during the holiday season, which meant that your writing skills needed to be polished and maintained at least 7 to 8 out of 12 months of the year. Many people learned cursive for the elegance it added. Plus, it just genuinely looked beautiful. Receiving a letter in cursive was a love language. It showed you cared. It showed thoughtfulness and attention to detail, because they could have just left a shoddy-looking note that looks like a fifth grader's homework. Cursive writing meant that someone was going out of their way to make an impression. But that was not always the case. Sometimes people just loved the air of luxury it added to their journaling, and for some it was just a cool skill to have and mentioned casually in conversations. Now that everyone has moved on texting and the DMs, writing in general is a lost art, let alone cursive writing. So, everybody remembers fax machines, right? Big, tanky printer-looking things responsible for handling important documents, files, mails, common in all kinds of offices and hospitals. Now, we are really talking about some old-age tech, because for a long time a fax machine was all you had if you wanted to get the typical service that emails provide for a lot of people these days. However, as widespread as these fax machines were, their time on top was going to end pretty soon. See, so far these were only so hot in the market because people had no better alternative. But when one finally did come around, it blew fax machines out of the park. Simply put, with the invention of the World Wide Web and modern advances in mailing and communicating, not only did fax machines become useless, but they also became very costly, making them twice the burden. Machines have upkeep and maintenance costs, plus all the paper, installation fees, supplies, and toner made it a pretty pricey way of doing your paperwork. Thank God for technology, because not only did they cost somewhat an arm and a leg, but they also took a lot of space and clashed with the interior design. Yet another common household item for Generation X that eventually got replaced by the forward march of human intellect and imagination were landlines. Phones today are capable of so much that some people seriously have entire YouTube careers on them, or get freelance work which revolves mostly around their phone, but just a while ago they were not capable of even a quarter of all that. Reliable calling between people had to take place using landlines, and every house had one. But landlines were prone to malfunctions or environmental damage. Sometimes a nasty little rodent would chew your wire and you would be stranded in your home, unable to contact anyone, and fixing it would be a whole day. Compare that to the ease and comfort of your smartphone, with which you can place a call without even needing credit now, just the internet. Some wondrous times we live in, don't we? Landlines were really a step forward for people all over the world, but even they look outdated in front of what we have now. Who knows if 40 years from now, kids will think the same about our phones. Alright, this one is definitely a lot more debatable than the other ones on the list so far. If you are from the X Squad, then you know all about manual coffee grinders and how they were a forearm workout in their own right. Sure, they took some time, but if you knew how to grind your coffee good and proper, you either had a possible future in part-time barista work and you would be the favorite roommate. Also, probably the one in charge of coffee every morning, which could definitely be a drag. It is just that manual grinders took a while to get the whole process going, and in today's fast-paced work culture, that kind of time is a luxury people cannot afford much. Electrical grinders are hence a lot more common because of the ease and quickness that they give, and they do arguably as good of a job, but some coffee purists and fanatics swear by manual grinders still. Maybe there really is some boost of flavor that we are not sure about? Now we feel like getting both grinders and doing a side-by-side comparison. Dialing in to know the time and weather is very much a lost custom that vanished as soon as smartphones took care of that too. Well, not just smartphones. In the present day, most technology, or at least practically anything that can connect to the internet, will let you know about the weather, and you do not need any Wi-Fi shenanigans just for the time. Even watches are something people solely use for fashion purposes instead of having one to tell the time easily by just checking your wrist, because people are so much more used to going for their phone instead. Hence, things like checking the time and weather via a dial do not really have a point anymore, but they had some ambiance to them. A pretty sky with some dark clouds hanging about. Maybe you think a rainy day is around the corner and call for the weather. Excitedly getting confirmation on your own little predictions and planning your day accordingly was a common part of people's lives in those old days. And we gotta say, that does sound a lot more exciting than just checking your phone for yet another thing. Digitalization has meant that there are now many different ways of storing things than there were before. As a result, physical copies of things are going out of style. Things like storing music on cassette tapes, DVDs, physical copies of video games, and more are now becoming obsolete in today's world, where everything can be backed up, downloaded, or streamed. Any kind of music you want is on Spotify or SoundCloud, and if it is not there, you can just head on over to YouTube. But there was definitely a lot of charm to having a stacked collection of cassette tapes with your favorite recorded tracks. Building up your stock was also its own little hobby that music collectors delighted in. But sadly, all of these things are a bit of a lost preference. Nowadays, even people who do it for nostalgia now primarily use streaming services due to the simple ease, superiority, and much larger library of music. This does not take away from how stylish listening to music on a Walkman was. As you would remember, having the newest cassette or a new Walkman was extremely fashionable, but today it is reduced to an unsustainable way of listening to your favorite tracks. Let's talk a bit more about the impact streaming has had on skills and hobbies from the Gen X era becoming useless, since even things like video cassette recorders are pretty ancient now. With the onslaught of DVRs and streaming services all over the place, people do not have much of a use for a VCR or the process of setting one up, which can be tedious. We would be surprised if people today even knew how to do that. Not that we blame them, It is not something they grew up with like the rest of us did. Still, it was lovely collecting your favorite movies on those tiny cassettes, was it not? Maybe it is just us, but all the effort that you had to put into a show or movie or any kind of media you liked also gave it some points in terms of novelty, at least more than browsing Netflix. Given how much access large libraries of music, shows, and information the internet gives us, things like TV guides also just do not really have much of a point anymore. Firstly, missing your show's time slot in general is a non-issue as of today, because if you miss something, you can go on Netflix or just pirate it either through MKV files, torrents, or illegal websites like PrimeWire, 123 Movies, you know the drill. Folks do not have much of a reason to buy a TV guide and check out the slots and programs so they know their way to good cable. Things like appointment television, as a result, have also faded away. It might be good that we can easily access our favorite media and explore new options, but there was certainly something special about it back then. Well, that was one lengthy trip down memory lane, but we have hit the end of the road now. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe.